Bishop, I'll be needing your help, so please make sure you're on unmute, please. And for the rest of you, if you happen to know the answer to this question, you're welcome to type it into chat. Knock, knock. This is your part, Bishop. Cash.
Cashew.
No thanks, I prefer almonds.
Oh.
And of course. And yes, it's the same joke as I told before, but that's the best financial joke I have ever heard. So you're probably going to hear it again. Right, Reverend Ma'am, delegates and visitors. It's my pleasure to report to you as the treasurer of the diocese. First thing I'd like to do is extend a broad welcome to two new staff members that we have. Although Destiny is not a new staff member, she is new to the accounting function, and she has been taking over a number of the bookkeeping services that Diana Ruby had been doing before. And also in September, we've hired a new controller whose name is Nagam Hakim. And I am so impressed with Nagam. She's done such a wonderful job in these short few months, and I know she's going to be a great addition to the bishop's staff. My presentation today is going to be divided up into two different parts. The first is talking a little bit about the year-end results for 2019 for our audit. And then the second will be bringing you up to date through September of 2020. So regarding the numerical part of our audit, we had assets at that time of 17.9 million, long-term or liabilities of 185,000, and net assets of 17.7. By the way, I'll be rounding numbers up to the nearest thousand, so you'll see they're a little bit different in the actual hard copies. Now, of the net asset number, those are made up of unrestricted assets, designated, board designated assets, and also donor restrictions. So under the donor restrictions, we have about 4.3 million, and under board designated, there are 3.4. So there are specific things we need to use part of those net assets for. Now, our investment portfolio as of the end of 2019 increased over $900,000. But you might remember that at the end of 2018, that was a particularly difficult year for the stock market. In fact, on that particular day, it tanked. So that's why there was such a huge increase. So right now, we're more or less back to where we were, not quite. And our balances as of the end of 2019 was 6.5 million. Now, as a former banker, one of my favorite financial statements was called the cash flow statement. And that's where you figure out where money was coming from specifically. And there's three different categories. One is through operations. The next is through investing. And then the third one is through financing. So overall for 2019, we had a decrease of cash of $59,000. And this is how it was divided up. Under operating, we actually had 103,000 that provided cash. They were sources of cash for our operations. And some of this had to do with the sale of some property that we had. It was Mantle Drive in Menifee. Now, under investing, though, we lost 166,000. And then under financing activities, there's a small amount of sources or additional cash, around 4,000. So that's what made up this decrease of 59,000. Another financial statement that I really like looking at is the statement of functional expenses. And this is where we take an income statement or profit and loss statement and divide it up into the different mission or ministry areas that we have, so we can determine how we're applying our funds to what our overall mission is. So for 2019, under the Bishop's Office and the ECC, it represented 30% of our expenses. Clergy and clergy support was 20%. Diocesan programs and initiatives were 17%. The Church Beyond the Diocese, as some of you know, this is the assessment that the diocese has to pay towards the wider church's functions. That amount was 13% of our budget, of our expenses. And then there were two support categories
Kirby.
called, yes?
Kirby,
Yes?
were other people able to hear Kirby?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Oh,
Yes.
someone respond?
I
Okay,
can hear you.
it was just us. All right.
Oh,
Sorry.
well, thank you. Thank you for checking. So getting back to the statement of functional expenses, there were two support areas. One is admin and governance, which is 16% of the total expenses, and then fundraising of about 4%. So overall, our expenses during 2019 was 2.9 million. Now, of that amount, we had 251,000 that went towards grants to help support the missions and functions at the congregational level. So moving into 2020, of course, the big news is COVID. So as the bishop had mentioned in her address, there were three areas that we decided on ways that we could directly help congregations. One was a PPP loan. So we submitted a request or an application on behalf of the diocese, but also for our mission congregation. So that loan came in at 377,000. We also, the executive council authorized us to go into a deficit situation for this current year of $280,000. So this is a change to our original budget. And the availability of funds for that actually comes from the accumulated surpluses that we have had in the past. Due to good financial management from my predecessor and past bishops and such, we were able to accumulate earnings on an ongoing basis for several years. So that is, we're actually now just using part of that by going into a deficit situation. And then the third way is through the For Such a Time as This initiative that the bishop had received many donations from you. And the amount of money that we have provided for primarily individuals was over $90,000. I do want to make a correction from the written report. I had 93, but we had to reclassify something. So right now it's around $90,000 we provided. Now moving on to September's results. There was a slight contraction that we had from the balance sheet from before. Assets are 17.7 as of September. They were 17.9, and 702,000 of that was represented in cash. And this includes our PPP loan. So of that 377,000, the diocese was going to be taking 135,000 of that amount. The rest has already been distributed to the congregations. Our liabilities are 191,000, and the net assets are 17.3. So with the sale of the property in Mantle Drive in Menifee, we no longer have any long-term liabilities. So those are all current liabilities that we have. So this is a good thing for the diocese. We no longer have those obligations to our bank. Now, how are we doing as far as our profit or loss? Well, we have a current loss from operations of 435,000. So as you might expect, a lot of this had to do with the COVID aid that we have provided, but it's offset a bit by our investing and financing. So if we take a look at our budget, there was a certain amount of money that we're able to use from our investments for payout, and we have not taken that payout yet. So that will go towards alleviating some of this deficit. And then the other thing is that we haven't recognized the funds that we're going to take on the diocesan level for the PPP loans. It's just cash in the bank right now. We haven't run it through our income statement. So once that happens with those two things, then our deficit, we will still have a deficit. However, it will not be as bad as that 400 some odd thousand that I had just mentioned to you. So in closing, I really want to thank all the members of the budget, the investment and finance committees. They really do wonderful work on your behalf. And we monitor what our financial situation is. And we realize going forward, it's going to be very important to do so. And however, those finances are in very good hands. And I want to also thank the congregations for turning in their 2021 CLS pledges. As you'll be able to see later on in our budget presentation, we really do rely on those assessments and contributions. So thank you so much. And, you know, challenging times have always been around in the church. always. And this is another one of those. But as I think we've seen in many examples, good things can come out of it. We don't know what that might be because God is the one in charge. So we can do the best job that we can, but we know God is always there to help us and support us. So thank you. This concludes my report.
Thank you, Kirby, for that report. And Gwen, you said someone has their hand up? Hannah Wilder?
Yes, thanks, Kirby. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the cost of the strategic plan and how much we're willing to reprioritize financially to achieve these goals, and what positions might be expanded because of the plan.
Actually, some of that will be covered during the budget presentation because we're implementing the first year, the 5-year plan. So could I defer that question a little bit till after the budget? And then if you still have something, I'd be happy to answer it.
Sure. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you so much. And now, if there are no further questions or comments, you see any, Gwen? All right, I will call on Ms. Terry Farrelly to present the proposed 2021 budget. And the budget document is available on Whova.
Hi, everybody. I am Terry Farrelly, and I was chair of the Diocesan Budget Committee. I'm also on the Diocesan Finance Committee. And before we get into a little bit of the specifics, I just want to share some highlights of the budget that we have proposed for you. First of all, the budget includes funding for the redevelopment of 2 congregations, which were discussed earlier today. It also provides funding to bring the College of Congregational Development to the diocese for lay and clergy leadership development. And it provides the funding for that great revival with the presiding bishop that is scheduled for December of 2021. And also the budget includes some new positions that will guide us through this strategic planning implementation. One is a half-time campus missioner for San Diego State. Another is a part-time peace and justice missioner. And another one is an advancement or development missioner to assist us in raising funds over the next 5 years to achieve all of the strategic goals. So on the next slide, you should be able to see how we have organized the budget.
Terry, can you pause
Yeah.
a moment? We, oh, now we can see what we want to see. Okay, I just had to break in, sorry.
Okay, all right, so this is the second slide. So you can see how we've budgeted that, the different areas of the strategic plan. So that's how we did that. We did it to kind of make our budgeting a little bit more transparent, a little bit more easier to understand, and a little bit easier to tie the budget to the specific categories. So you see this categories listed up here. Also, for budgeting, we have an additional category that we call Episcopal. And that's used to record administrative indirect costs of providing these ministries. So some things that we couldn't necessarily just apply to one specific section here is included in the Episcopal. So the next slide, we can see the sources of funds here. And it will give you an idea of where the money comes from to do all of this. And you can see, like Herbie said, it's like 67%, almost 2/3, comes from the common life share contributions from the congregations. And so that's why it's so important to submit those canonically required amounts. And you can see how all of these funds will be used to do the mission work which is done not only on the congregational level, but also on the diocesan level. So you see mostly common life share. There's some investments. Now the uses, let's go talk about the uses. Okay, so this is how the money is used. So the Episcopal area, that is the largest because it supports all of the missions. So like I said, expenses that can be directly allocated to the missions have been done that way, but the ones that can't would be considered Episcopal. And then one other point to make is with the strategic plan being a 5-year plan, that next year you might see this pie looking a little bit different, because as we go through the 5 years of the strategic plan, some areas will be emphasized more in some years than others. Also, the budget really just respects the funds that are coming in for operations, and it doesn't really show some of the other funds that will come in specifically for the strategic plan. I mean, for example, what we had this year with that for such a time as this funding, that was not part of our operating budget because the funds came in specifically for that and they went out specifically for that project. So getting into the numbers a little bit, this is a summary of where we are, but you can see how we've kind of split the funding through the different ministry areas, and then you can see the grand total over on the right-hand side. And this, I should say, this has been recommended for approval by the budget committee, the finance committee, and the executive council. So as we see, the common life share is roughly $1.7 million, and it's a very slight increase from last year's budget, and of course is based on the parochial reports. If you look at program services fees, I don't know if you can point to that, Kirby, but those are fees, they're income, and they're fees used to offset some of the costs of providing activities. So that would include, say, the diocesan convention, the annual youth trip. They have some monies that come in for that. And there are also some fees for the School of Ministry. So things like that are included in the program services. Other income is interest that we receive from some of the loans that the diocese has. They've given to congregations, and so the income is included in there. So in total, the income sources are slightly less than $2 million. And that's really like operating income. On the cost side, you can see personnel costs for one. You can see how the salaries are spread over the ministry areas. And the diocesan leadership, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, with a heavy heart, decided that they would not be able to offer across the board cost of living increases to the staff. So we didn't include that in the budget. There are a few employees whose compensation was below the market level, and so there were some adjustments for these employees to be moved up to market. And as I said earlier, there are a couple of additional positions, like the campus minister and the peace and justice minister and the development minister that's included. Regarding some of the expenses that we had, we really didn't want to look at, say, the 2020 actuals, because we were in such a, a COVID situation, and the something like the travel expenses and that kind of thing, we didn't use that much this year. So, but we didn't want to transfer that to this upcoming year. So we used expenses that were closer to the 2020 budget and not the 2020 actuals. So that could be lower, but we're hoping and we're optimistic that we can move to a post-COVID world sooner than later. And so the expenses will move back closer to last year's expenses. Also, if you look under expenses for stewardship, you can see that there's facility and equipment expenses. And this is a bit of a reallocation of how we're looking at costs. We're looking at a wider definition of the word stewardship. Not only does it have to do with the stewardship of money, but we also have to be good stewards of the physical assets of the building. And so in this case, we took the cost of running the Episcopal Center in Ocean Beach, and we have that under the stewardship ministry. And the largest expense under the program expenses is the money that's sent by the diocese to support the mission of the church beyond, the church beyond the diocese. So not only do congregations share in the mission of the diocese, but funds are also contributed to the wider church, and that's what you see on that line. The grants program, just want to mention something there as well. And there'll be more information coming about that, but what we did this time was, rather than gathering the applications early and seeing how they fit in the budget, we started to look at, okay, well, what can we fit into the budget? What can we commit to? And then have the request for grants. We have a new grant that's called Unexpected Good Ideas Grant. And those are for ideas that arise in the course of the year that are worth funding, but we just don't know what they are right now. Missional congregational support is a combination of prior grant categories such as Fearless Love and the multicultural, and operational grants. And property grants are similar to what we've had in prior years, but the process of going about and asking for the grants has been revised. So we can move on to the next slide. So if you look at just the operational uses, the uses of the funds exceeds the sources by 531,000, which is not unusual. This is where we have other funding sources. So for example, Kirby was talking earlier about how we use income from our investment portfolio. And so we're going to do that again this year. One change that we're going to make, or we're proposing to make, is that we would use 5.5% payout from our investments rather than the 4% that we've used in the past. We've been conservative with the 4%, but the 5.5% is within this range of 4 to 7%, which is in line with this Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. So that act says, as long as we're between 4 and 7%, it's a prudent pull from the investments. The other items that we use to offset the difference is the use of some of the principal payments for loan repayments that the diocese receives. And this amount was approved by previous executive councils to take some of the principal payments and set it aside for mission work. So we're going to be used some of that money that's been set aside to do the mission work for 2021. And then, as in the past, this is a usual thing that's done as well, is that we'll be using some temporarily restricted funds for the purposes that they were provided for. One example is that we received a $15,000 grant from the wider church for campus ministry. So we'll use the $15,000 that is temporarily restricted, and it will go towards the ministry at San Diego State. So, and there are other funds that are similarly restricted, and we'll be using those for the purposes that they were restricted for. So the very bottom line is that there's a small surplus, just under $5,000. So in summary, we have a slightly better than balanced, but essentially a balanced budget. And a couple of things just to mention is that we did not include a specific line item for contingencies in case something goes wrong. And certainly we've had some experience with that this year. But as Kirby talked, is that the Executive Council authorized the diocesan leadership to go into this deficit situation of $280,000 to provide support during the pandemic. And as he said, this came from previous surpluses and accumulated income. Not all of that amount was spent in 2020, and not all of it is expected to be spent. And so we're hopeful that the Executive Council will agree to carry over, hopefully, $40,000 to 2021 for COVID or for other contingencies. So that's where we think we'll get the contingency if something goes wrong. We'll have it taken care of there. So just to conclude, I think the Executive Committee, by approving the strategic plan, they certainly gave a worthwhile and challenging charge to the Budget and Finance Committees. But we believe this budget meets those challenges and places a firm foundation to achieve the goals set out in that strategic plan. So, and Kirby and I would be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Terry, should I go ahead and I can address some more of what Hannah had mentioned at this point? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
So Hannah, directly in response to your question, the overall strategic plan budget that was presented for the 5 years is 2.95 million. So part of that's going to be funded from the operating budgets, and part of it's going to be through fundraising and restricted funds and other types of things. So we're taking just 1 year of the operating budget to fund the strategic plan. So part of that plan are additional personnel positions. One of those is the advancement or development person. We decided to bring that person on in October. And then we have additional part-time positions. One is a website developer. She has actually started, but she'll be continuing some work. And then we have a justice minister, and the last one was a digital resources person. This is for Faith to Go. So that's how we're initially starting out to implement some of the plans from or to implement the strategic plan. Does that satisfy your question? Do you have anything else?
Yeah, so you have a new website developer, you said, as part of the strategic plan?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, I thought I heard
Actually, I was just telling you what the new positions were,
Okay.
and that was one of them. She's already on board right now.
Yeah, sorry. There is the website being developed as we speak. And it's part of the operating budget. It's already underway.
What do you,
Right,
okay,
so,
can I?
Before we go any further, would you stop, please? Let the bishop talk.
actually, before we have discussion, we need to actually have a motion and a second to approve the budget. So is there a motion to approve the budget for 2021?
So moved.
All right, I heard a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
I heard a second. Thank you. So is there any discussion? And you will need to raise your hand virtually and be recognized. All right, I recognize the Reverend Penny Bridges.
Thank you, Bishop. I am apparently unable to be on video, but I'm Penny Bridges. I'm at St. Paul's Cathedral. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm curious about the investment income line item, the decision to make it 5.5% of endowments. We went through an exercise at the cathedral recently to look at recent trends and the history of the yields, and taking into account the fees that we pay, and our desire to see those invested funds grow over time. And we actually reduced our budgeted draw from 5% to 4%. So I'm wondering if the question of preserving the capital came into play.
It did come into play, and I will ask Kirby to address that question.
Yes, we had checked with two of our CPA sources who indicated this range that Terry had mentioned to me was appropriate for a payout. But you're absolutely right. I mean, we would love to have stayed at 4%. I think during the past 2 years, the total portfolio that we have has been earning about 7 or 8%. So we're still well under what our earnings have been. Anyone who's following the stock market knows it's really going up and down. We don't know what's going to happen as a result of the election. So it's my desire that we try to move back down towards that number. But as you saw from the operating deficit that we had, it was about $500,000, and we had to make that up somehow. And we felt that this was one of our assets or resources that we had to do that.
All right, thank you. There is somebody who has their hand up. Who is it, Gwen?
Louis Blossom.
Okay, Louis Glosson.
Good afternoon, Bishop Louis Glosson, Church of the Good Shepherd in Hemet. I can't speak for the Executive Council of the Episcopal Church, but what I can say is that we're at 5.5 on our budget. And I would encourage people to look at how much funds they are spending or using for fees, and check with the Episcopal Church to see if they can beat that.
Thank you, Butch. Are there any other hands up? All right. If there is no other discussion, we will call for a vote to approve the budget. So please go to edsdvote.com and enter your 4-digit PIN.